A wheelchair? Is this some kind of command-level charity initiative I wasn't briefed on? The voice, sharp and laced with a corrosive brand of arrogance, cut through the low hum of the servers in the Global Strategy Center. The crowd of young, ambitious officers, all polished boots and ramrod spines, offered a nervous, sycophantic ripple of laughter. They turned their gazes from the vast, holographic world map glowing in the room's center to the source of the remark, Captain Eva Rostova, and then, with a mixture of pity and contempt, to its target. The target offered no reaction. She sat in a meticulously maintained, matte black wheelchair, her hands resting calmly on the joystick controls integrated into the armrests. Her presence was an anomaly in this room of physical perfection, a quiet disruption to the established order of things. Her hair was gray, cut in a severe, practical style, and her face was a roadmap of lines that spoke not of fragility, but of long, patient observation. She wore a simple, dark pantsuit, the civilian attire making her stand out even more starkly against the sea of digital camouflage. But when the facility's commanding officer, General Madsen, saw her posture, the way her spine was perfectly straight, the way her eyes scanned the data streams not with confusion, but with a familiar, predatory focus, he felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite place, a ghost of a memory from a different war, a different era. He held his silence, a silent observer to the unfolding drama. If you believe that true strength is measured not by the volume of the voice, but by the weight of one's actions, type competence is king below. The woman in the wheelchair, Dr. Eris Thorne, simply adjusted the height of her primary monitor. The quiet were the motor, the only sound she contributed to the room. Captain Rostova, emboldened by the laughter and the woman's silence, strode forward, her boots clicking with aggressive confidence on the polished concrete floor. She was the rising star of Stratcom, a graduate from the top of her class, with a mind as sharp as a bayonet and an ego to match. This exercise, Global Thunder 7, was her stage, her chance to prove she was ready for the eagle insignia of a major. She saw Dr. Thorne not as a person, but as an obstacle, a bizarre, inexplicable variable in her carefully planned ascent. "With all due respect, Doctor," she began, the word doctor dripping with condescending sweetness. "This is the tip of the spear. We are simulating global thermonuclear conflict. The stress levels in this room can and will break people. People who can stand on their own 2 feet. Are you certain you're in the right place? Perhaps the library or the historical archives would be more comfortable." The insult was twofold, a jab at both her physical state and her age. It was designed to publicly humiliate, to establish dominance, to signal to everyone in the room that Rostova was in charge, and that this strange, silent woman was irrelevant. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken complicity. The junior officers looked at their shoes, at the ceiling, anywhere but at the woman in the chair. They were caught between the discomfort of the moment and their fear of crossing a captain with a notoriously vindictive streak. Dr. Thorne's focus, however, remained unbroken. Her fingers, long and elegant, danced over a specialized keyboard, calibrating her interface. The movements were not tentative. They were economical, precise, each keystroke a testament to thousands of hours of practiced discipline. She was a master of her instrument, and the condescending noise around her was merely atmospheric interference, a signal to be filtered out. Rostova, infuriated by the lack of a response, pressed on. "Look, I run this shift. My name is on the line when this simulation goes live in 10 minutes. I need warriors, not passengers. I need people who understand the ethos of sacrifice, of physical and mental toughness. This," she said, gesturing vaguely at the wheelchair, "is anathema to that ethos. It's a symbol of limitation. And in here, we cannot afford a single limitation." The room felt colder now. The initial nervous amusement had curdled into a palpable tension. Rostova was no longer just being arrogant. She was being cruel, and the institutional silence that met her cruelty was a form of agreement. The system, in that moment, sided with the loud, the arrogant, the physically whole. The system was making a terrible assumption. And Dr. Thorne, her eyes still locked on the screen, her expression as calm as a frozen lake, was about to let that assumption play itself out to its logical, catastrophic conclusion. Her silence was not weakness. It was patience. It was the deep, abiding calm of a professional who knew, with absolute certainty, that the battle to come would not be fought with words. It would be fought with numbers, with logic, with pure, unadulterated competence. And in that arena, she was without equal. The assumptions being made were a currency she would soon bankrupt. The quiet clicks of her keyboard were the sounds of a vault being opened, a legacy being prepared for withdrawal. The room saw a woman in a wheelchair. They were about to witness the arrival of a legend. The grand, holographic map at the center of the room shimmered, the calm blue of the oceans and the stable green of allied territories suddenly bleeding into a violent, angry red. The simulation had begun. It wasn't a scenario, it was an ambush. A coordinated, multi-vector surprise attack from a near-peer adversary. Satellites went dark first, their icons winking out on the map like extinguished stars. The room, once filled with the low hum of technology, was now assaulted by a cacophony of alarms, each klaxon a scream announcing a new disaster. Report. Rostova barked, her voice tight with adrenaline. She thrived in chaos, or so she believed. She saw it as her element, a forge to temper her command abilities. But this was not the controlled chaos of a textbook exercise. This was a digital hurricane, and her command was a ship being torn apart. The reports came in a panic flood. North Atlantic Fleet is blind. We've lost all satellite uplinks. Cyber attack on the power grid. Eastern seaboard is going dark. They're launching. Multiple ICBM signatures detected. Origin point classified. Our countermeasure platforms are non-responsive. The code is corrupted. Rostova stood before the main screen, barking orders. Isolate the virus. Reroute communications through the backup relays. Give me a firing solution for those missiles. Her commands were textbook, the correct responses for a conventional attack. But this wasn't conventional. The enemy AI, designed to be ruthlessly intelligent, had anticipated every move. The backup relays were already compromised. The virus was a phantom, shifting its signature every second. The firing solutions were useless without targeting data from the dead satellites. Her strategy was loud, aggressive, and utterly futile. She was a boxer swinging wildly in the dark, exhausting her strength against an enemy she couldn't even see. The red on the map spread like a bloodstain. Icons representing naval groups, air wings, and ground forces began to flash and then disappear, each one a silent scream in the digital void. The casualty counter in the corner of the screen was spinning like a slot machine, the numbers climbing into the millions. The young officers frantically typed at their consoles, their faces pale, their confidence shattered. The room was descending into a controlled panic, the veneer of professional calm stripped away to reveal the raw fear of failure. And through it all, Dr. Eris Thorne remained an island of tranquility. She wasn't watching the main holographic map. Her attention was divided between three smaller, secondary monitors that the other officers had dismissed as auxiliary data feeds. To them, they were just noise, raw atmospheric data, solar flare projections, deep space telemetry. To her, they were the sheet music of the storm. Her hands moved with an unhurried, rhythmic grace. She wasn't fighting the enemy's strength. She was mapping its weaknesses. She saw what the others didn't. That the enemy's overwhelming cyber attack, their perfect communications blackout, had a cost. It required an immense amount of focused energy, creating a faint, almost undetectable echo in the global communications network, a shadow of the weapon itself. While Rostova was trying to shout down the hurricane, Thorne was building a barometer. She found the pattern. It was a ghost in the machine, a whisper of code hidden in the background radiation of the network. Her fingers began to move faster, not with panic but with purpose. She wasn't trying to restore the primary network. That was a fool's errand. Instead, she was hijacking a forgotten system, an old, decommissioned weather satellite network, slated for deorbiting. It was analog, crude, a relic of a bygone era, and it was completely invisible to the enemy's sophisticated digital warfare tools. She wasn't trying to fight. She was trying to think. She was a grandmaster, and this was her endgame. The chaos in the Global Strategy Center had reached its crescendo. Captain Rostova's voice was hoarse, her commands growing more desperate. Why don't we have eyes on anything? Someone give me a goddamn picture. The officers around her were defeated, their faces illuminated by screens filled with error messages and connection timeouts. The simulated casualty count had just ticked past 10 million. It was a complete and utter rout, a strategic annihilation. The exercise was lost. On the main holographic display, the last major naval asset, the entire Pacific Fleet, was cornered, bracketed by enemy submarine and hypersonic missile icons. They were blind, deaf, and moments away from being wiped off the map. It was at that precise moment that Dr. Thorne acted. Her work on the secondary monitors was complete. On her screen, a complex string of codes scrolled into place, a beautiful, intricate piece of digital poetry. She took a slow, deliberate breath, her fingers hovering over the execute key. It was a single keystroke, a quiet, almost imperceptible tap, but its effect was seismic. Across the globe, the derelict constellation of weather satellites, forgotten junk to the rest of the world, pivoted as one. For a fraction of a second, they focused a tight beam transmission, not at the Pacific Fleet, but at a specific patch of the ionosphere. The signal, a complex packet of data disguised as atmospheric noise, hit the charged particles and refracted, bouncing downward at a new, unpredictable angle. It was a bank shot on a planetary scale. The signal, now hopelessly distorted but still coherent to the right receiver, found its target, the lead aircraft carrier of the Pacific Fleet. The ship's emergency analog receiver, a piece of technology considered obsolete, suddenly crackled to life. It received a single, simple order, authenticated by codes so old they weren't in any modern database. The order contained just two elements: a course heading and a command for absolute radio silence, a dead stick directive. The icon for the Pacific Fleet on the main map did not fire back. It did not engage. It simply vanished. One moment, it was there, a cornered animal awaiting the slaughter. The next, it was gone. The enemy AI, its perfect trap now empty, began to flood the zone with active sonar and radar pings, searching for a ghost. The panicked alerts in the command center stopped. The screeching alarms fell silent. The casualty counter froze. The only sound was the low hum of the servers. The silence was more profound, more shocking than the noise it replaced. Every single person in the room, from the lowest-ranking ensign to General Madsen himself, stared at the holographic map in stunned disbelief. The Pacific Fleet was gone. Not destroyed, not defeated, just gone. They had slipped through the net, performing a strategic disappearing act that was, by all known metrics, completely and utterly impossible. Captain Rostova stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape. She stared at the empty patch of ocean on the map, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She slowly turned, her eyes scanning the room for an explanation, and finally settled on the one person who hadn't been participating in the panic. She looked at the old woman in the wheelchair, who was now calmly sipping from a bottle of water. What was that? Rostova's voice was a hoarse whisper, her arrogance shattered and replaced by pure, uncomprehending shock. What did you do? Dr. Thorne lowered her water bottle, her gaze finally meeting Rostova's. Her expression was neutral, her voice calm and even. I issued a course correction. The simplicity of the statement was a thunderclap in the silent room. It was a direct, irrefutable refutation of everything Rostova had said. The woman she had dismissed as a limitation, a passenger, a symbol of weakness, had just single-handedly saved the entire Pacific Fleet from certain annihilation with a move so brilliant, so outside the box, that no one else had even conceived of it. The quiet professional had made her move, and the board was forever changed. The demonstration of impossible skill hung in the air, a palpable force that reshaped the atmosphere of the entire room. The shockwave of Dr. Thorne's action had silenced the alarms, but had also silenced every voice, every arrogant assumption, every whispered judgment. The officers who moments before were staring at a screen depicting their own professional demise now stared at the woman in the wheelchair with a dawning sense of awe and profound confusion. Who was she? How had she done what an entire room of the military's brightest minds could not? Captain Rostova was the epicenter of this silent earthquake. Her face, once a mask of confident authority, was now a canvas of bewilderment and a creeping, horrifying shame. The foundation of her worldview, that strength was loud, visible, and physical, had been pulverized by a single, silent keystroke. The silence was finally broken not by Rostova, but by Lieutenant Marcus Cole. Cole was a quiet, unassuming signals intelligence officer who had remained at his station throughout the entire ordeal. He hadn't joined in the laughter at Rostova's jokes, nor had he panicked when the system collapsed. He had simply watched, his gaze frequently drifting toward Dr. Thorne, a flicker of recognition in his eyes that no one else had noticed. He now pushed his chair back, the scraping sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room, and walked with a steady, deliberate pace to the main command console, his footsteps echoing like drumbeats. He ignored the stunned captain and the bewildered crowd. His focus was singular. He typed the command "override" into the terminal, his access codes flashing with a high level of clearance that surprised even General Madsen. A secure search prompt appeared on the main holographic display. Cole's voice was clear and steady, cutting through the tension with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Access deep archives. Search designation: Cerberus. The system hesitated for a moment, processing a request that likely hadn't been made in over a decade. Then, the screen flickered and a file appeared. It was heavily redacted, stamped with warnings and classification levels that made the room's standard top-secret clearance look like public information. But the core data was there, stark and undeniable, projected for everyone to see. The narrator's voice could have etched the words on a glass. Name: Eris Thorne. Last active rank: General of the Air Force. Command: Founder and Director, Strackham Special Projects Division, Project Aegis, retired. The screen scrolled, a cascade of legendary accomplishments flowing down the display. Architect of the Aegis Protocol, the foundational doctrine for modern network-centric warfare. Lead designer of the Global Thunder simulation series, including the very scenario they were currently running. Recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom for actions during the Silent War, a classified cyber conflict that had averted a global catastrophe. The list went on and on. Patents for encrypted communication systems, commendations for strategic foresight, articles in classified journals that had rewritten the rules of engagement. And then, at the bottom, a single, poignant note under her service history. Honorably retired due to injuries sustained during a direct kinetic strike on Command Bunker Epsilon. 7. The room held its collective breath. The wheelchair, the object of Rostova's scorn, was not a symbol of limitation. It was a testament to sacrifice. It was a purple heart rendered in chrome and steel. It was the price she had paid for the very security and doctrines that allowed Rostova to have a career in the first place. Lieutenant Cole turned away from the screen, his back to the damning list of achievements. He faced Dr. Thorne, and in one fluid, powerful motion, he snapped to the most rigid, respectful position of attention he could muster. His hand came up in a salute so sharp it seemed to cut the air. His voice, now filled with a reverence that bordered on worship, rang out in the silent room. General Thorne, it is an honor to serve with you again, ma'am. The words general and ma'am struck Captain Rostova with the force of physical blow. Her face went white. The blood drained from it, leaving a sickly, pale mask of horror. General. This woman was a general, a living legend, the architect of her world. The weight of Lieutenant Cole's salute and the title he had bestowed upon Dr. Thorne settled over the room like a shroud. The title general was not just a rank. It was a revelation, an indictment, a complete recontextualization of every word that had been spoken. Every officer in the room, from the most junior ensign to General Madsen himself, felt a profound and chilling sense of their own ignorance. They hadn't just witnessed a brilliant tactical move. They had witnessed the public humiliation of a legend, and they had been silent, complicit accomplices. The shame was a cold, physical presence in the room. Lieutenant Cole held his salute, his arm rigid, his gaze locked on General Thorne. He was not just showing respect. He was performing an act of correction, a public penance on behalf of everyone present. He was reestablishing the proper order of the universe, an order based not on rank or physical ability, but on legacy and competence. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, General Thorne gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, and Cole crisply dropped his salute. He then turned, his movements precise and deliberate, to face the still frozen Captain Rostova. His eyes, which had been filled with reverence for Thorne, were now chips of ice. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried an authority that dwarfed Rostova's parade ground shouts. "Captain Rostova," he began, his tone quiet and lethal. "The woman you dismissed as a passenger designed the test you were so spectacularly failing. The simulation you thought was your stage is, in fact, her classroom, and you have just provided a masterclass in the very arrogance she designed this scenario to expose." He took a step closer, his voice dropping even lower, forcing everyone to lean in, to hang on every syllable. "The wheelchair," he said, echoing her earlier, venomous words, "is the result of a 15-kiloton conventional warhead striking her command bunker in the Hindu Kush. She was shielding 2 young analysts with her own body when the ceiling collapsed. Those analysts went on to become the core of our nation's cyber defense. Her limitation, Captain, is the reason you even have a power grid to protect." The story landed like a volley of shots in the silent room. The abstract idea of her injury was now a concrete, heroic image. The source of their mockery was, in fact, a monument to a sacrifice they could barely comprehend. Cole wasn't finished. He gestured to the holographic map, where the ghost of the Pacific Fleet remained a testament to Thorne's brilliance. "She wrote the book on modern strategic warfare. Literally, the manual on your desk, Network-Centric Engagement Doctrine, Volume 4, has her name on the title page. Every theory you've ever studied, every tactic you've ever employed, bears her fingerprints. The very language you used to command was codified by her." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, letting Rostova fully absorb the depth of her catastrophic misjudgment. Then he delivered the final, devastating blow. "You asked if she was in the right place. The truth is, Captain, we are the ones who are out of place. We are guests in her world. She doesn't just outrank you, Captain. In this room, in this domain, she outranks all of us. She is Cerberus, the guardian at the gate, and we're simply the ones being tested. And you, Captain," he said, his voice now devoid of all emotion, "have failed." The finality of his statement was absolute. It was a verdict delivered with the cold, impartial weight of truth. Captain Rostova did not argue. She couldn't. She simply stood there, stripped bare of her rank, her ambition, her pride, exposed as a fool in a room full of her subordinates, under the calm, unwavering gaze of the legend she had tried to belittle. The quiet competence of General Eris Thorne had not just won the simulation. It had won the war for respect, and it had done so without her ever needing to raise her voice. The aftermath in the Global Strategy Center was not one of celebration, but of profound and somber reflection. The simulation was paused. General Madsen, his face a mask of grim contemplation, quietly dismissed all non-essential personnel. The young officers filed out, their confident strides replaced by a humbled, shuffling gait. They didn't speak. They didn't look at each other. They each carried the heavy weight of their own complicity and the searing memory of Captain Rostova's public vivisection. The story of what had happened, however, could not be contained. It escaped the soundproofed walls of the command center and spread, as stories of great failure and great triumph always do, like wildfire. It was whispered in the mess halls, recounted in hushed tones in the barracks, and dissected in encrypted chat rooms among the global intelligence community. It became a piece of institutional folklore overnight, a modern military parable. They called it the Cerberus test. The name itself became a new piece of jargon, a shorthand for any situation where an arrogant superior was humbled by a quiet, underestimated subordinate. To be tested by Cerberus meant you had allowed your assumptions to blind you to the reality of competence sitting right in front of you. For Captain Eva Rostova, the consequences were swift and severe. She was formally removed from her command position in the Global Thunder exercise. A letter of reprimand was placed in her permanent file, a black mark that would effectively cap her once limitless career trajectory. But this official punishment paled in comparison to the unofficial one. The loss of respect from her peers and subordinates was absolute. She became a ghost in the hallways, officers suddenly finding their shoelaces fascinating as she approached. Her loud, confident voice was gone, replaced by a strained quiet. The true measure of her character, however, was not in how she handled her success, but in how she handled her failure. A week after the incident, she appeared at the entrance to the Wargaming Center. She was no longer in her crisp uniform, but in simple fatigues, her hair pulled back, her face devoid of makeup. She waited patiently until General Thorne had finished a debriefing session with a group of young analysts. As Thorne maneuvered her wheelchair toward the exit, Rostova stepped forward, not with her old swagger, but with a palpable, nervous humility. She didn't block Thorne's path, but stood to the side, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. "General," she began, her voice quiet, almost cracking. "Ma'am." General Thorne stopped, her calm eyes regarding Rostova without judgment. "Captain," she replied, her tone even. Rostova took a deep breath. "Mom, that signal bounce. The way you refracted the transmission off the ionosphere. The standard models say the signal degradation should have been 99%. It shouldn't have been coherent." She wasn't making an excuse. It was a genuine question, the query of a student to a master. It was the first time she had sought to understand something rather than simply command it. It was the beginning of her lesson. General Thorne regarded her for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "The standard models are correct," she said simply, "but they assume a stable ionosphere. You forgot to account for the solar flare activity from 3 days ago. It created a temporary, localized lensing effect. The signal wasn't degraded. It was focused. The explanation was simple, elegant, and devastatingly obvious in hindsight. It was a variable that was present in the data for everyone to see, but only Thorne had possessed the wisdom and patience to look for it. General Thorne didn't gloat. She didn't say, "I told you so." She simply answered the question. Then, she began to move away. But as a final gesture, she paused and said, "The data is always there, Captain. The challenge is learning how to listen to what it's telling you, instead of telling it what you want to hear in that one sentence." She had given Rostova not just a tactical lesson, but a philosophy. She was offering a path forward, a chance for redemption through competence. The legend of Cerberus was not just a story of vindication. It was becoming a story of mentorship. And the quiet professional continued her work, her influence spreading not through orders, but through quiet, powerful truths. The ripples of the Cerberus test continued to expand, transforming from mere gossip into foundational doctrine. The event became a case study at the National War College, dissected by future generations of military leaders. The central lesson was brutally simple. Your greatest adversary is not the enemy on the map, but the assumptions in your own mind. The prejudice against General Thorne's physical appearance was used as the prime example of a catastrophic intelligence failure, a failure to correctly identify and assess the most significant strategic asset in the room. The console that General Thorne had used, once just another anonymous terminal, became an object of reverence. Someone, a person or group who never came forward, affixed a small, polished brass plaque to its base. The inscription was simple the Cerberus Terminal. Listen to the data. Cadets and junior officers would make quiet pilgrimages to see it, touching the plaque for good luck before major exams or exercises. It was a physical artifact of a legend, a reminder that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal is a quiet, disciplined mind. Captain Rostova's journey of humbling continued. She threw herself into her work with a newfound ferocity, but it was a different kind of energy. Her arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, almost obsessive humility. She spent her nights in the archives, reading every paper, every doctrine manual that General Thorne had ever written. She was not just studying tactics. She was trying to understand the mind that had so effortlessly dismantled her own. She became a voracious student of her own failure. She requested a transfer to the simulations department, a move many saw as a step down, a career dead end. But Rostova wasn't chasing rank anymore. She was chasing understanding. She wanted to learn how to build the kinds of tests that had broken her, to understand the architecture of the very systems Thorne had designed. She became an advocate for what she called asymmetric human factor analysis, a formal way of saying, never judge a book by its cover. General Thorne, for her part, deflected the new wave of attention with the same quiet grace with which she had endured the scorn. When General Madsen offered her a formal advisory position with a staff and a grand title, she politely declined. "My work is here, General," she had said, gesturing to the Wargaming Center. In the data, she did, however, agree to mentor a small, hand-picked group of young officers. They were not the top-of-their-class hotshots like Rostova had been. They were the quiet ones, the observers, the analysts who were more comfortable with a spreadsheet than a parade ground. She taught them not through lectures, but through problems. She would set up impossible scenarios in the simulation and simply watch as they tried to solve them. Her only guidance was a constant refrain. "What are you assuming?" Challenge the assumption. Her philosophy of quiet competence began to permeate the culture of the base. The value of the silent professional, the individual who lets their work speak for them, saw a resurgence. It became a point of pride to be the one who listened more than they spoke, to be the one whose contributions were discovered in the results rather than announced in the briefing. The legend was no longer just about a single event. It was about the enduring principle that competence is its own authority. It is a force of nature that, given time, will erode even the most stubborn mountains of prejudice. The story became a living part of the institution's immune system, a permanent antibody against the virus of arrogance. The name Thorne became synonymous with a kind of intellectual and moral clarity, a reminder that the truest strength is often found in the places and the people we are most conditioned to overlook. A year passed. The annual Global Thunder exercise came around again, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The swagger and bravado of the previous year had been replaced by a quiet, intense focus. The new crop of officers approached the simulation not as a game to be won, but as a complex problem to be solved, a mystery to be unraveled. They had all heard the story of the Cerberus test. It was now the first lesson they learned, a mandatory part of the orientation briefing. And the person delivering that briefing was Captain Eva Rostova. She stood before the new arrivals, her posture confident, but her eyes holding the deep, sober wisdom of someone who had learned a hard and permanent lesson. She was a different officer, a different person. Her voice was steady, authoritative, but devoid of its former arrogance. She began not with a rousing speech about victory, but with a story about her own failure. "A year ago, on this very floor," she started, her gaze sweeping across the young faces, "I was given command of this exercise. And I failed. I failed completely, catastrophically, and publicly. I failed not because the enemy was too strong, but because I was too weak. My weakness was not a lack of knowledge or a lack of courage. My weakness was my own certainty. My weakness was my assumption." She then recounted the entire story, leaving out no embarrassing detail of her own condescension and prejudice. She told them about General Eris Thorne, about her insults, and about the brilliant, impossible move that had silenced a room and rewritten a doctrine. She used her own shame as a teaching tool, a powerful, authentic lesson that no textbook could ever replicate. By sacrificing her own pride, she armed the next generation of leaders against the very flaw that had nearly ended her career. Her story transformed the legend from a cautionary tale into a constructive principle. The lesson was no longer just don't be arrogant. It was actively seek out the quiet voices. Value the unconventional perspective. Respect the data, not the uniform. When she finished her speech, there was a profound silence in the room. She had earned back the respect she had lost, not by denying her failure, but by owning it, by turning it into a gift for those who followed her. The simulation that year was different, too. It was harder, more complex, filled with the kinds of subtle, hidden variables that Thorne specialized in. And the officers met the challenge. They collaborated, they listened to their analysts, they questioned their own assumptions at every turn. They didn't win in a blaze of glory, but they succeeded through careful, methodical, and competent work. They succeeded by listening to the data. General Thorne watched from a small, private observation deck, a position she had finally accepted. She never interfered, never offered a word of guidance. She just observed, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. Her legacy was secure. It wasn't in the plaque on the terminal or the stories told in the mess hall. It was here, in the actions of these young officers. It was in Rostova's humility, in the collaborative spirit of the command floor, in the deep and abiding respect for the quiet, difficult work of finding the truth. Her legacy wasn't what she had done, it was what others now did because of her. The wheelchair, once a target for scorn, was now understood for what it truly was, not a symbol of weakness, but a throne. It was the seat of a quiet authority earned through sacrifice, proven by competence, and solidified into a legend that would guide and protect the institution for generations to come. The story of General Thorne became a permanent fixture in the institutional memory, a foundational myth for a new era of leadership. Her principles, born from a moment of public humiliation and private genius, were woven into the very fabric of how soldiers, sailors, and airmen were trained. The Cerberus doctrine, as it came to be known, was not about tactics or technology. It was about a mindset. It championed intellectual humility over arrogant certainty. It prioritized demonstrated skill over projected confidence. It taught that true respect is a debt paid only to proven competence, and that it can never be claimed by rank or title alone. True legacy, the narrator would say, is not a statue carved in stone, a name chiseled on a wall. Those are monuments to the past, cold and silent. A true legacy is a living thing. It is a principle that breathes in the actions of the next generation. It is a question that is asked in a briefing room. What are we assuming? It is a moment of hesitation before a judgment is made. It is the instinct to listen to the quietest voice in the room, recognizing that it may hold the most important truth. General Thorne's legacy was not in the medal she had won or the battle she had orchestrated. It was in the culture of quiet professionalism she had forged in the crucible of a single, transformative event. It was in Captain Rostova, who became one of the most respected and effective instructors in the War College, forever teaching the lesson of her own failure. It was in Lieutenant Cole, who rose through the ranks, his own quiet competence a testament to his mentor's influence. It was in the thousands of young officers who heard her story and understood that the strength of their character would always be more important than the strength of their voice. The greatest strength is not the power to command obedience, but the wisdom to inspire excellence. It is a quiet, steady, and unbreakable force. It is the calm at the center of the storm, the mind that sees the pattern in the chaos, the hand that makes the single, decisive move that changes the outcome of the war. It is the understanding that assumptions are the enemy within, more dangerous than any foe on the map. The ultimate triumph is not in being loud enough to be heard, but in being so competent that your actions create a silence in which everyone else is forced to listen. That is the power of the quiet professional. That is the legacy of Cerberus. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where silent precision defines their worth. Subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.